Hey, we've got it pretty good in Canada for the most part, right? As a society, we have reasonably good policies and programs in place overall. We care about each other and are generally supportive of reasonable approaches to the issues of the day. I know there are problems, and I'm not trying to say that life here in Canada is a picnic for all people in all situations. But generally speaking, we've got it pretty good when compared to many other countries. One thing that does impact many of us is the affordability crisis. The pandemic really kicked the crap out of parts of our economy, and just about everything got more expensive. Well, let's talk about that in this video. A little bit about how we got here, although I think I just spoiled that part when I mentioned the pandemic, and more about solutions so that we can all feel better about this amazing country that we live in. What makes life expensive for the average Canadian? What do we spend our money on? Well, in October 2023, Statistics Canada published this snazzy infographic that shows the average spending breakdown for 2021. Now, 2021 was year 2 of the pandemic, so it's maybe skewed a little bit, but when you look at the same infographic from 2019, you see it's roughly the same proportions. Of course, higher spending in 2019 on transportation and lower spending on household stuff, but not too far off relative to all the other categories. The big 4 categories shown were shelter, food, transportation, and household stuff. So where are we with those categories now that we're in 2024? Well, it's all way more expensive. That's where we are. But why? I already mentioned the biggest and most obvious cause, the pandemic. The pandemic required the federal government to react quickly and put things in place to help protect people and to keep our economy's head above water. So there was a lot of federal spending and drastic lowering of interest rates by the Bank of Canada to urge people to spend. When you have really, really low interest rates and lots of spending, you get inflation. The cost of just about everything went up. And while the federal government and Bank of Canada together have been doing what you would expect to bring inflation down, all of which is working, by the way, that recovery is slow. There's no magic button in the Prime Minister's office that fixes these things in an instant. Most developed economies around the world have been going through the same things and having a similar affordability crisis. So how does the affordability crisis get fixed? Let's talk about those big 4 categories of spending and what's going on. Shelter first. When you look at the housing plans from the current government and the Conservatives, they're almost identical. For instance, both have a GST rebate for new construction intended for the rental market, and a number of other measures and incentives that push municipalities to speed up approvals for new housing. There are some minor differences that will make some people say one plan is way better than the other, but that's not really true. The plans are pretty much the same, but I'm impressed. The Conservative Party actually has a plan for this issue. It's not just slogans and blaming. There's a National Post article that talks more about this if you're interested. But the bottom line is that more housing getting built will help this part of the affordability crisis. There's also a pretty good report from Ontario on things that can be done to make housing more affordable, even though that province is significantly behind in building the number of new housing units they committed to. And we also just learned that the Liberal government has announced a new Renters' Bill of Rights to help with the problem of rent gouging and other nasty aspects of the landlord-tenant relationship. You hungry? I'd love some popcorn right now. The cost of food has risen 5 to 7% in 2023 and set to increase another 2.5 to 4.5% in 2024, according to the Canadian Food Price Report published in December 2023 by Dalhousie University, UBC, University of Guelph, and USask. There are lots of causes of food inflation, from Russia's invasion and ongoing war in Ukraine to the huge challenge of climate change to corporate greed. So that's the problem. What's being done? Some of the federal government's response is short-term and some is really long-haul thinking. On the long-term front is climate change. The federal government has a plan, and it's not a bad plan, but it's been really slow to get it going. It's starting to roll now, and one of the jewels of the plan is pollution pricing, also known as the carbon tax, which anyone who knows anything about climate change will agree that it's the least intrusive and most efficient way of getting everyone to reduce their use of polluting fuels, which, among other things, leads to some increases in the price of food. Another measure to help address high food prices is the Affordable Housing and Groceries Act that has been introduced by the Liberal government. Part of that act has resulted in a grocery rebate to Canadians with low and middle incomes to the tune of a maximum one-time amount of $548. That was provided back in July of 2023. And another recent bit of juicy news about the inner workings of groceries: Pierre Poilievre's top advisor is a lobbyist for Loblaws. That doesn't really sound ethical, does it? Yelling about the high cost of food being Justin Trudeau's fault, while having one of your advisors whispering in your ear on behalf of a large grocery chain? Should we expect that Pierre Poilievre, who wants to be Canada's next Prime Minister, will do better than Justin Trudeau on the issue of the high cost of food with a lobbyist in his caucus meetings? Transportation, gas for the car. The price changes like the weather. Look at this chart of gas prices. Lots of fluctuation, but you can get an idea of trends. It really spiked there after 2020, probably caused by the wretched carbon tax, right? Nope. Here's another chart by the Canadian Fuels Association that notes the causes of price spikes. They don't seem to list the carbon tax. Look, there's lots of yelling about how the carbon tax is pushing people into poverty. It isn't, partly because, and I don't know if you know this, there's a carbon tax rebate that goes up as the price of carbon goes up. I'm not surprised if you didn't know. Opponents of the carbon tax never mention it. Meanwhile, the price of gas goes up and down daily. Recently, like yesterday, gas went up by 17 cents a litre in Alberta. Yeah, Alberta, because the premier of that province raised the gas tax. By comparison, the recent rise in the carbon tax amounted to a 3-cent per litre increase. Now, don't get me wrong, I am all for the price of gas going up significantly because of the incentive that will provide to people to stop using so much of it and instead switch to public transit, EVs, or any other possible option that might be available to them. In terms of the affordability crisis, there's lots of slogans about getting rid of the carbon tax. Will that make life more affordable? Do you think the price of things will actually go down if the carbon tax is abolished? I generally like to be an optimist, but come on. Prices of pretty much everything will likely stay where they are. With the elimination of the carbon tax will also come the elimination of the rebate that we all get. Less money in your pocket, but prices will likely stay the same. Thanks, Poilievre. Okay, let's wrap this up. For all the rage thrown at the current government, blaming them for the affordability crisis and saying they aren't doing anything, here's some other things that have been going on. No time for the details, but we could talk about $10 a day childcare. How about pharmacare? Thanks, NDP, for that. Dental coverage that by 2025 will cover 9 million low and modest income Canadians. Again, thanks, NDP. Increase to the federal minimum wage in 2023 from $15.55 an hour to $16.65 per hour. It's still way too low, by the way. Canada Child Benefit improvements in November 2023. Canada Disability Act passed in 2023. It will help the 23% of people with disabilities who live in poverty. Income supplements for seniors, conversations about basic income, efforts to tackle junk fees. Whew! That doesn't sound to me like nothing is being done. And I get that all of that is maybe contrary to good conservative values that stress we should do these things ourselves without the help of the government. But I want to live in a Canada that helps take care of those who need help. Despite the affordability crisis, it hasn't hit everyone the same way. Those who can afford it should be okay with helping to fund these types of programs for people who don't have the same capacity to do it themselves. It's easy for populist leaders to yell about how bad things are, blaming the Prime Minister for every single issue, regardless of whether it's a federal government responsibility or not. But as voters, we need to be serious about these issues and look for solutions. Figuring out the real cause of affordability issues is important for sure, and with any kind of rudimentary scrutiny, you can find that the Prime Minister is not to blame, at least not to the extent these populist leaders want you to believe. When you're angry about the cost of living in Canada being higher than you want, you're susceptible to looking at populist leaders who are doing the yelling and thinking to yourself, that guy there is saying what I'm feeling, so he'll definitely do a better job than the current Prime Minister. Go the extra step. Ask what the populists' plans are. In most cases, you'll find that all the yelling is empty. It's not backed up by any credible plan to do anything different or better.